Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll just take a moment to let people join, but you're very welcome. Hello to everybody joining. Welcome. We'll just wait for 1 or 2 minutes before we get started. Thank you for joining and welcome. Hello to everyone joining. You're very welcome. We'll kick off shortly. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. Thank you so much for joining. It's brilliant to see you all. So many people joining from so many places around the world. My name is Marion Sharples. I'm the head of international partnerships and training at the UK Women's Budget Group. And it's my pleasure to co-host this session today with my colleague, Hana.
Hi everyone, my name is Hana Abid. I work with Marion at the Women's Budget Group. It's great to be here and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Hana. And we're very lucky to be joined by our trainer, Micaela Fernández Erlauer, who we will introduce later. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin this webinar on gender responsive budgeting, what it is and how to do it. I'm speaking in English, as you can tell. If you would like interpretation, we have interpretation into Spanish, French and Arabic available on this webinar. So please select the channel that you would like. You should have an interpretation button at the bottom of the screen, and Hana is pasting into the chat instructions of how to do that as well. So hopefully everybody can find the channel they would like. We're looking to enable closed captions as well, but apologies, we're having some difficulties getting that started, but hopefully we will be able to soon. We will be recording the session today, and please feel free to use the question and answer function to ask questions. You can write questions in English, Spanish, French, or Arabic. And before we move on to our introductory activity today, I would also like to give a really warm welcome to our interpreters working with us today, Carlos, Nafisa, and Alvaro, as well as our technicians who are recording all of the different channels today so that we can use them as a resource later. Sofia, Ana Maria, and Sebastian, thank you all for joining us. So the first thing we would like to do is have an introductory activity to this session where we invite everybody to get involved. Then we'll pass over to our trainer, Micaela, for an overview of gender responsive budgeting. Hana and I will then say a few words about the Global Partnerships and Learning Programme of the Women's Budget Group. And then we'll open up to questions. So really looking forward to this time that we have together. Thank you again for joining us. It's brilliant to see so many people tuning in to learn and discuss more about gender responsive budgeting. So thank you for joining us, and over to you, Hana, for our introductory activity.
Thank you, Marion. So to get started today, I'd like to invite everyone to respond to the following question. What do you think of when you hear the words gender responsive budgeting? So what words do you associate with the phrase or term gender responsive budgeting? So Marion is going to place a link to something called a Mentimeter in the chat. And if you click on that link, you might need a code, which will also be pasted in the chat. And you can just type in a few answers, a few words. One is fine. You can do up to 5 or 6. And then we can see what everyone comes up with. So the link is there. So just to repeat the question, what do you think of when you hear gender responsive budgeting? I think Marion is going to share her screen so that we can see everyone's ideas pop up. Give it a second.
My browser's just loading, as you can see. Thanks for your patience.
Wow, brilliant. We've got some brilliant words coming up here. Wow. Okay. That's fantastic. I think that will be someone's, I say someone's, it's my new desktop background. Thank you everyone for participating in that. That was just an activity to get us connected, to get us started, to put us all kind of in the same headspace before we kick off today. So now I'm going to pass you over to Micaela, who's going to give us an introductory overview of what gender responsive budgeting is and how to use it, how to do it. So Micaela Fernández Erlauer, Erlauer is an economist and freelance trainer on gender responsive budgeting. Her research interests include public finance and gender budgeting. Micaela holds an undergraduate degree in economics from the University of Buenos Aires and is currently reading for her master's in public policy planning and evaluation at the University of San Martin. She is part of Economía Feminista, where she gives lectures on feminist economics to different institutions. So I'm going to pass you over to Micaela now.
Hello, Can you hear me well? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Hana and Marion, for that amazing introduction. And welcome everyone to this webinar on gender responsive budgeting. Just give me a minute that I will share my screen. So I think we're ready now. Well, today we are going to see what gender responsive budgeting is and why it is important. Then we are going to go over some arguments on how to convince someone who is unconvinced by the need of gender responsive budgeting. Then we are going to make use of what we learned in the case of Argentina. And finally, we will go over some challenges and how to overcome them. So in the feminist economics approach to fiscal policy, there's a topic named gender budgeting. You can come across it as gender responsive budgeting or gender responsive public expenditure management, or just as gender budgeting analysis. So the public financial management system is what underpins the government expenditure. So the best way to analyze public spending is through budget. A gender-based assessment of budgets allows us to
nos permiten abrir este ciclo para poder
الميزانة المراعية للمنظور الجنساني، والطريقة المثلى للقيام بذلك هي تحليل الإنفاق العام من خلال النظر في الميزانية. أود أن أشارك معكم بعض التعريفات حول هذا الموضوع. لدينا تعريفين.
was written by Bandler and Sharp. It's Debbie Bandler and Rhonda Sharp in 1988 and goes like this. Gender responsive budgeting refers to a variety of procedures and tools that aim to disaggregate fiscal policy impacts on gender inequality. And then I brought another one that is taken from O'Hagan and Klatzer in 2018. It's worth mentioning that Angela O'Hagan is a long-standing member of the Women's Budget Group and is currently on the Management Committee. The definition that they provide is gender budgeting seeks to alter the processes of raising and allocating resources within political institutions to achieve more gender equal outcomes. So what they say is that if we analyze it, we can change it. We can change the course of the public administration strategy. So what is GRB? It is a gender mainstreaming procedures that targets fiscal policy, which is expressed in the public budget.
هي أولاً الإجراء المتعلق بإدماج المنظور الجنساني في الميزانة، وكذلك ثانياً النقطة الثانية تتعلق بتحليل الآثار أو الآثار الناجمة عن الإنفاق الخاصة بالمجموعات المختلفة. ليس فقط يعني قد تتعلق هذه الطريقة بالموضوع الجنساني، ولكن أيضا تتعلق بالعلاقة الجنسانية وكيف تشتغل وكيف تعمل. والآن كما قمنا بتوضيح GRB، والآن لابد وأن نأخذ بعين.
It is neither a separate budget for women nor a special focus on gender-specific policies. Finally, the goal is not related to spending equal amounts of money on women's or men's issues. So The main objectives are, first of all, raise awareness and understanding of gender issues and the impacts of policies and budgets on gender equality. Then, making governments more accountable for their gender budgetary and policy commitments. And finally, changing and refining government's budget and policies to promote gender equality. Why is gender responsive budgeting so important? Well, public expenditure decisions can have materially different impacts on different genders. This means that economic and social outcomes are constrained by gender relations. So, for example, if women are more likely than men to have responsibility for unpaid work, and on average, they earn less than men, and they are more likely to be living in poverty, this means that they tend to require more social security.
هذا يعني تحتاج إلى ضمان الأمن الاجتماعي، ولهذا السبب فإن هذه النقطة بالذات تؤثر على هذا الجانب. وبهذا المعنى يعني الميزنة المراعية للمنظور الجنساني مهمة للغاية.
Gender relations are everywhere. They shape our reactions to incentive. They impact on how labor is organized. They define which places people frequent, even which means of transport we use. So gender norms are political institutions, and so are budgets. They are gendered as they occur within these institutions. To sum up, policies develop in gendered context, so they can benefit either women, men, or both. Asking some questions such as, where does money come from? Where is it allocated? Does it benefit women? Does it benefit men? Does it advance gender equality? Asking those questions contributes to improving gender analysis. So this is based on this idea that government spending is a powerful tool. It's a powerful tool that can either move us towards gender equality or reinforce gender inequality. So what I mean is that GRB is like the missing piece of the puzzle. When there's a government committed to gender equality and advancing women's rights, there should be spending commitments too. Otherwise, it's just empty words. So here I'm going to present some arguments on how to convince someone who is unconvinced that maybe they are useful for you. So I will present them in English, all of them, and then I will show you some slides on Spanish, French, and Arabic. So maybe you can screenshot them, well, just to have them. Well, first of all, there's a wide variety of GRB approaches. Gender budgeting involves using the tools, techniques, and procedures from the budgetary cycle in a systematic way, right, in order to promote equality. So there's no one-size-fits-all strategy. In that sense, it's versatile. That's a good argument. Then it improves the effectiveness of modern budgeting. What does this mean? GRB contributes to improving the basis for this effective modern budgeting because the challenges of effective gender budgeting are in some ways micro-expressions of the challenges of modern budgeting. Then, GRB is necessary to measure the impacts of actions, in this case, spending, on an objective that is gender equality. So it's very useful in that sense. Then it incorporates gender disaggregated data. Incorporating this type of data routinely facilitates the design, the implementation, and the evaluation of public policy. And of course, if we meet someone who doesn't believe that this tool is powerful, you can start by imagining having a goal, in this case, gender equality, and not knowing the impacts that your own actions have on achieving this goal. So it's all about adding gender intelligence to public spending. Finally, gender blind budgets are a dead end. You need to take a firm stand that continuing a path of blind budgeting is unacceptable, just unacceptable given current rates of gender inequality around the world. It can be delayed any longer. So I will leave you just a few seconds on the slide in Spanish. In French now. Finally, in Arabic. Okay. So now let's try to use everything that we've learned in the last few minutes to look at the case of Argentina. So I'm from Argentina and I've been studying this specific case. So I would like to tell you about what made it happen and the lessons that we've learned during this process. So what made it happen? Well, first of all, feminist organizations that were campaigning for GRB. Also in 2018, a planning tool to advance public policies that promotes gender equality in Argentina was adopted. Right?
تم تبني هذا المفهوم في الأرجنتين وتم إدخالها
estructurado y consensuado por las diferentes ramas del gobierno y de los actores de la sociedad civil, como los sindicatos,
international organizations, and also academia. Among other initiatives, it outlined a middle-term strategy to create a gender-sensitive budget at the national level. In the short term, it aimed to develop a methodology to measure expenditure with a gender perspective. In practice, this means identifying areas of national government expenditure which aim to reduce gender inequalities. The tool used is called gender tagging, which means tagging or labeling programs and activities which aim to improve gender equality. For example, within the Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity, all activities are tagged. Another example of a tagged activity is the Universal Child Allowance. This is a monthly payment to parents in vulnerable situations, 90 of whom are women, 90% of whom are women. A lot of social security activities are tagged as well. However, further work needs to be done to mainstream this methodology to other areas of expenditure. And well, in the medium term, the goals were firstly to calculate the expenditure that has been gender tagged, and secondly to disseminate this methodology of tagging. The number of gender tagged activities more than doubled between 2019 and the budget that is going to start this year. Well, another important actor in this issue was the feminists in decision-making positions. They worked a lot to achieve GRB. Also, the increasing gender awareness in society played a part in achieving gender-responsive budgeting in Argentina. And regarding the lessons learned, I will point out some obstacles that emerged during this process and how Argentina is overcoming them. First, the lack of gender disaggregated data and integral statistics. It became apparent that this was an essential part of the process of implementing GRB. So each unit is changing data collection processes in order to incorporate gender as an attribute. Then the lack of gender knowledge in public administration was also an obstacle. To solve this, trainings were carried out so that public officials could expand their knowledge on gender and the need for gender-responsive budgeting. Finally, the importance of political will. With a more progressive government, it was easier to implement GRB. But still, the androcentric procedures and the patriarchal institutions remain. As mentioned, the number of activities gender tagged is increasing, but this tool has still not been mainstreamed to other activities apart from the one explicitly related to women's issues. Well, to conclude, let's see some overcoming challenges. First, budget is often resistant to change. So how can we approach to this challenge? The budget cycle and the policy process provide many entry points for gender analysis. There's a range of tools and methodologies that have been developed over time to support quality gender impact analysis. And of course, to generate evidence of the gendered dimensions of policy and resourcing proposals. Then there's the challenge of the lack of knowledge around gender. This is the gender sensitivity deficit of those involved in policy design. In this case, it's possible to write manuals or use existing toolkits, that were already prepared, and also to deliver trainings on gender theory and public policy. Manuals and trainings are probably a good starting point to solve this obstacle. Then, as it was mentioned in the Argentinian case, the unavailability of gender disaggregated data, it's a well-known obstacle that happens all around the world. In this case, it's possible to find mechanisms to improve information systems. This is a challenge mostly for low capability environments where information systems aren't as developed as needed. So, as I said, a good starting point is understanding how your information system works and try to advance improvements. Finally, the lack of political support and institutional commitment, it's of course an obstacle, and it's a very hard one. Well, campaigning for GRB to be implemented and vote for candidates that have a feminist agenda, support this demand with your feminist organization, or support whoever is driving it forward. It's also a good thing to do if we want to overcome this challenge. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Micaela, for that brilliant presentation. It's great to see so many people engaging in the chat on this topic. I think we're going to have a really good discussion in a few minutes, but if I could just remind everyone to make use of the Q&A box, which you should see down the bottom of your Zoom icons, because then that puts all of the questions in one place, and then we can get to them easier during the Q&A portion of our session. But now that you've heard a little bit about what gender responsive budgeting is and how to do it, Marion and I are going to talk to you a little bit about what we do at the Women's Budget Group. So I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me a second. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the UK Women's Budget Group is and what we do here. Then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our Global Partnerships and Learning Programme, including a quick overview of the programme's values, some of the work that we've done so far, as well as our future plans and next steps. So the UK Women's Budget Group is a network of over 1,000 academics, members of NGOs and trade unions, as well as the general public. We're mainly UK based, but we have members based in other countries too. We scrutinise government economic policy from a gendered perspective, and we are best known for our analysis of the UK budget and spending reviews each year. So we put forward economic policies for a gender equal future, and we build the capacity of women and women's groups to participate in economic debate. So the Global Partnerships and Learning Programme, which I work on with Marion, we work with civil society organisations and policymakers around the world to carry out and implement gender responsive budgeting in their specific contexts. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the programme and our values. We launched the programme last year in January 2021. And so far we have delivered 12 training and advisory sessions to a number of partners around the world. Our current partners are groups based in Sierra Leone, in Kenya, in the US, the MENA region, and in Greece. Over the summer, we successfully recruited a pool of 12 expert trainers on gender responsive budgeting. So these trainers are based across the world, from Latin America to Australasia. Micaela is one of these expert trainers, and it's been great working with her for this webinar. We've worked with other trainers for some of our previous training sessions, and we look forward to continue working with our experts in future training opportunities. So a big part of our work in the beginning was reflecting on how we can make our program compatible with our ambitions to decolonize, to shift power, and to be anti-racist. So we have committed to working based on principles of collaboration, of flexibility, of sustainability, and solidarity with our partner organizations. The training and advisory sessions that we have covered so far have been on a wide range of topics, and we've been because we are being committed to responding to the needs of our partner organizations and working collaboratively with them wherever they are at in their journeys. So some of our sessions have focused on the technical aspects of how to carry out gender responsive budgeting. Others have been more about how to fundraise, how to set up a gender budgeting network, and also sessions on social media strategies to raise awareness on gender responsive budgeting. So that's all from me. I'm going to pass you over to Marion now.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And I just wanted to pick up on what Hannah was saying about the work that we've done with partner organizations. So we've been working with partners in Greece, with ActionAid, ELAS, and Karditsa Women's Centre, who are active in Athens and in Karditsa in Greece. And both of these groups had developed relationships with their municipal governments, as well as community groups based in the two cities. And we have been working with them to collaboratively to develop training sessions for local government officials in Athens and in Karditsa, on what gender responsive budgeting is and how it can be used. And we had our first session last summer, which was a general introduction to gender responsive budgeting. And our next session will be in a few weeks' time. And it's going to focus on gender responsive budgeting in the context of public services, which is an issue I'm sure will be very important to many people who've joined this webinar today. And we're particularly going to focus on looking at a gender analysis of spending on sports and recreation, and also looking at public safety at the municipal level. If we could go to the next slide, please, Hannah. Thank you so much. And I wanted to share some feedback that we had from our partner, Mata, in Greece after our first training session with local government officials. So we saw an 80% increase in awareness and expertise. And one of the participants, who at the time was the manager of the Athens Women's Counselling Centre, she took a public pledge at the end of the session to work more on gender responsiveness in her work. And since then, actually, she's now been appointed as the head of gender mainstreaming within the Athens City Council, which is brilliant to see her acting on her commitment and the public pledge that she made. And just before we open up to questions, and thank you to everybody who's been writing in their questions so far, I have some questions back to you, I suppose, bearing in mind that this is an introductory session on gender responsive budgeting. I'd like to invite you to think about your work, the work that you do, and think about where you could use gender responsive budgeting, in what ways, at what points of the budget cycle, what would you need to use it, and how would a gender impact analysis of the budget support your own work? So just sharing those questions with you. And just wanted to share our contact details, myself and Hannah, our Twitter handle, and also our, sorry Hannah, if we could just stick to the next slide, sorry. Thank you. We've got our contact details, our Twitter handle, and also our website where you can find out more about the Global Partnerships and Learning program. But it's it's brilliant to be here with you all as part of that program. So I will close there and look forward to discussing some questions.
Thank you for that, Marion. I can see that the Q&A function has been exercised a lot in the last 10 minutes or so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up a few questions and direct them towards Micaela and Marion, and we'll start the discussion off there. If you just bear with me, some of the questions have been asked in languages other than English, so I'll have to do a quick translate and you're just going to have to bear with us. So we have a question, I think either Micaela, this is a good one for you, but can you please describe how gender responsive budgeting can help to change and evolve gender norms towards equity? I'll give you a minute to answer that. Okay, and then another question is, who are the major stakeholders for the design, implementation, and evaluation of the impact of gender responsive budgeting? So who is needed to be part of that process of implementation, design, implementation, evaluation? And then another question specifically on the Argentinian context, please could you talk about the role of Argentina's Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity in implementing gender responsive budgeting? I guess that would be for you, Micaela. Yep, if you just like to kick off, unmute and kick off, thank you.
I was just waiting for you to finish. I will start by the first one. That was how can GRB help to challenge gender norms? I think, well, as I said in the presentation, government institutions are the ones that design public policy, and they influence, in that sense, how people react to that. So public policy specifically is the way that government has to change outcomes, right? So if a government is committed to gender equality and they understand that issue as an obstacle that it's based on the gender norms, you can start by providing money to solve the main issues that underlines gender equality. So, for example, spending on social services is the best way to start challenging the norms that women has to perform, right? So if we have a person that has a lot of care responsibility, and you are a government that knows that care responsibility is interfering with this person's leisure or professional career, you can design a policy that understands that, in this case, women are the ones that have more responsibility for that. So by designing this policy, allocating resources to that policy, yes. So in this case, I mean it. Money speak louder than words. So it's important both to design policies that have a gender perspective, but also communicate the objectives of that policy and how government understands the situations and how it aims to transform it. So in that matter, you will have media and conferences and people talking about that policy, and that's a first step if you want like to challenge in the argumentative way. I hope that I answered that. I don't remember the following.
Thank you, Micaela. That was very, very helpful. The second question I asked, but it's for either you or Marion, who are the major stakeholders for the design, implementation, and evaluation of the impact of gender responsive budgeting? Would you say?
And the next one?
The final one, specifically about Argentina. Please talk about the role of Argentina's Ministry of Women, Genders and Diversity in implementing GRB.
Okay, Marion, if you want to answer the second one and I start thinking about the third one.
Of course. Thank you, Micaela. Yes, thank you so much for this question about the stakeholders. I think this is a really, really important point about accountability and about ensuring that these efforts are rooted in the needs and the demands of citizens. And I think that we know that gender responsive budgeting is a tool, but it's a tool with a particular outcome in mind. It's not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. And I think that's really important when we're thinking about accountability mechanisms and about design and implementation and evaluation, because we know that governments can do certain things, but civil society has a really crucial role to play as well in identifying those needs and really and demanding them from the people who are elected to represent them. So I think there has to be, for a really effective and transformative kind of structurally focused gender responsive budgeting, there have to be really clear cycles of collaboration and of accountability and of kind of joint purpose, I suppose, between civil society and government. So I would say that in terms of who are the major stakeholders are, I would certainly say that civil society is crucial in identifying those needs and in pushing their governments, their representatives to pursuing gender equality in an intersectional and in a transformative way, using the funds that taxpayers provide. You know, that we have to think about that accountability cycle. So I just wanted to say something on that. And I think if I could also just say something briefly on the first point around social norms, I think gender responsive budgeting can be really transformative in terms of investing in social infrastructure. I think investing in social infrastructure is a really crucial way of challenging gender norms and of particularly provide kind of challenging the inequalities that originate in unpaid care responsibilities, for example. So we're talking about well-funded, well-paid, well-run childcare services and adult care services. We did, the Women's Budget Group a few years ago now did a piece of work with the International Trade Union Confederation on the impact of investment in social infrastructure, and we saw actually that the returns to investment in social infrastructure are huge, not only in creating more jobs, particularly more jobs for women, but also actually in many cases create more jobs for men because of the kind of induced employment effects. So that's always a really useful example, I think, to draw on when we're talking about the importance of social infrastructure and really how it is as essential to the functioning of our society and our economy as physical infrastructure. And it also goes really far, I think, in terms of tackling gender norms. So I just wanted to make a comment on that. But back to you, Micaela, for that final question about the ministry in Argentina.
Thank you, Marion. You are really clear about it. The question about the role of the Ministry of Women should be answered like in a more interior way. So I want to make sure that you understand that the budget is a collective process. It involves multiple tasks, multiple actors, as Marion said, and it includes a political definition of prioritizing the objectives of closing inequality gaps. The Ministry of Women, or the creation of the Ministry of Women, that was 2 years ago now, helps to reassure that the government is committed to gender equality. But also, it's a very good actor when it comes to coordinate the public administration areas. So the debate that many branches of the government have with civil society organization, for example, can be organized by the Ministry of Women. Also, I wanted to say that the Ministry of Women is the only ministry that has all their activities tagged. So it's very important when it comes to having an institution that truly design their policies with a gender perspective. And of course, it collaborates when it comes to preparing trainings or writing manuals or reports and all that. For example, a very important collaboration that they did was this year, Argentina is carrying the population census. They wanted to do it, of course, understanding the demands of the civil society. They wanted to do it measuring gender identity in the census. So registering that, it's very difficult because it's about like a change in theory and a change in methodology. So the technical cooperation in this design was a work that was carried out jointly with the Ministry of Women, right? Like the institute that provides us with statistics and the Ministry of Women. I don't know if it was that's my answer.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Micaela. I'm aware we only have a couple of minutes left, so I just wanted to select a couple more questions. We've had so many questions coming in. Thank you so much for all your engagement. This is brilliant. I feel we could have an all-day conference about this, which we might do, actually. I'm inspired to do that. So I just wanted to pick up a couple more questions and invite Hana and Micaela to respond before we close. So one question we've had through, what several people have asked about this actually, has been about this idea of tagging in Argentina. Has that changed budget allocations? Is that enough? What more do we need to see? How useful is this tool? Micaela, I'm sure you can say a lot about that. Maybe we can invite you just to say a few words. And then the other question I think is really important to raise, just before we wrap up, is about the idea of gender being more than just we're talking about women here. We're talking about structures, the need for intersectionality, and there was a particular question about the inclusion of trans women and indigenous women in Argentina, which would be great to touch on as well. So in just a couple of minutes, who would like to go first, Micaela or Hana?
Well, Micaela's spoken for a while, so I'm happy to jump in and talk generally about gender just being a starting point. So of course, when we're talking about gender, we're talking about structures. We're not just talking about the different impacts on men and women. And like we've said before, gender responsive budgeting is simply a tool to try and influence policy change to improve the lives of like the automatic thing to say is improve the lives of women, but what we mean is improve the lives of everyone who struggles under the current economic structures that we are living in. So this white supremacist capitalist patriarchal structures that we're all subject to. So it's very important that when we talk about gender, especially when we're dealing with the technical aspects of gender responsive budgeting and gender disaggregated data, that you get as specific as possible when you're exploring the material impacts of our economic structures on groups of people. So we'll never just focus on gender, we'll always think about all of the intersections that cross with gender to provide, like to create a specific experience. So we're talking about like race, we're talking about disability, we're talking about location, we're talking about socioeconomic background, we're talking about the various like different environments and contexts that people grow up in that shape their environment. So it's right, I've seen quite a few comments in the chat about gender not just being about the difference between men and women, but the starting point of what we're looking at when we're looking at our structures is that they're very much built around a white supremacist patriarchal model. And so gender is the first starting point for looking at the impact of that. But of course, we don't stop there. So that's all I'm going to say on that.
Thank you, Hannah. And maybe just a few final comments, Micaela, from you.
Well, I'm very happy that this has been brought up because a lot of limitations were found in relation to the low scope of labeling across the entire national public administration. First of all, the reproduction of gender roles in labeling, that's the main issue, because as I said before, the activities tagged, they are increasing, right? So there's a lot of work being done by the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Women and the other areas of expenditure, because it's both a technical issue and a thing about like the policies that have been developed for more than just a few years, right? So they have been designed in an androcentric way, or maybe in the reproduction of the gender roles. So that's the great challenge that gender tagging has. Also, it's important that as like the budget in Argentina is a budget based on results, there's an absence of tools to weight the spending, right? So this lack of expenditure weighting, it's a limitation, right, for the incorporation of policies that, although not formulated with a gender perspective, may have a positive impact in the reduction of inequality gap. That's a very important point because it's something that happens all the time. And completely. Well, it's completely right. So it's about what I said, like adding intelligence to the budget and adding intelligence to the design of public policy. And of course, there's a lot of work to be done. This is a very, very recent project that started here in Argentina and hopefully starts all around the world. And it's very important to keep in mind that there are many tools, right? Then we can start like a process of a gender-aware policies, right? So you can identify policies of different portfolios and programs and pay attention to the implicit and explicit gender issues involved, right? So in that way, you challenge that policies are gender neutral. But that's very difficult, as I said, because then you have to start changing everything. Like there's a lot of bureaucracy involved. And well, yeah, Marion,
Absolutely.
sorry.
No, I completely agree, Micaela, and I'm sad that we have to wrap things up. I feel like we're just beginning the discussion, but I think it's a really important point to raise, that it's you know, what we see in Argentina, there are steps forward, but it's by no means everything that needs to happen. There's still lots to be done. Before I hand over, thank you so much, Micaela, for answering these questions, and to Hana as well. And before I hand over to Hana to close, I would like to invite all our participants to fill out an evaluation form for this webinar. We'd be really keen to hear what you thought about it, how useful was it for you, and also in particular, what would you find useful as a next step. That you can input that information there, and you see it there in the chat in all 4 languages. So I invite you please to click on that before we close the webinar, otherwise it will be lost, but we will email it around to you as well. That's it. I'm going to pass over to Hana to close. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marion. Thank you, everybody, for coming to join us and giving us an hour of your day today. It's been so encouraging to see all of the questions, all of the engagement in the chat. Something tells me that this was the beginning of a very long conversation. So I'm really happy to see how much enthusiasm there is for the topic. And I really look forward to having more discussions in the future. So before we leave, I just want to say a huge thank you to Micaela for her wonderful presentation and for answering all the questions and for working with us over the last few weeks as we organize this webinar. A massive thank you to our interpreters, Carlos, Nafisa, and Alvaro, for all of their amazing work doing the interpretation. And also a thank you to our technicians, Ana Maria, Sofia, and Sebastian, for helping us with the recording so that we can put this webinar up on our website, and everything will be captioned in the various languages available. So yeah, if you'd just like to remember to get in touch with us if you want to have any follow-up discussions about gender responsive budgeting or any potential training on gender responsive budgeting, then Marion has just posted our contact details in the chat. Otherwise, thank you again for coming, and I hope you have a lovely, lovely day. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Kayla just putting her email in. Okay.